GM friends, welcome back to another episode on the Friends Validator Show. If this is your first video, I'm your host Juri Maibaum, and this show is up that brings together crypto pioneers, exciting projects, and a thriving community. We at Friends Validator are a core contributor to the staking sector and believe that it will grow into a multi-billion-dollar industry over the next couple of years. On this show, you will learn everything you need to know about proof of stake, how to profit from the proof of stake run-up, and so much more. If this sounds interesting to you, and you want to learn more about proof of stake, subscribe to this show. And today I welcome Karel from Union to the show. Union is one of the most anticipated launches in the interchain in 2024, as the project is about to bring interoperability primarily via IBC to every corner in the crypto industry. And in today's episode, we are going to talk about cross-chain asset transfers, ZK-cryptology, Union's most important integrations, Union's value accrual, and much more, essentially breaking down all of these more complex terms. With that being said, Karel, thank you for coming to the show.
Yeah, thank you so much for having me.
Yeah, the pleasure is all mine. As mentioned, you guys' launch is like highly anticipated, alongside maybe the Berachain launch and a couple of others. So it's 2024 is really the year of the exciting launches, right? So maybe let's start at the very, very beginning, because Union is like a project that is not too old yet. So maybe you can talk a little bit about your journey in the area of interoperability, because Union wasn't the first project you worked on that had something to do with bringing interoperability to certain areas into the ecosystem.
Yeah, exactly. So we founded Union about a year and a half ago, and I think we came out of stealth actually around this time last year. So initially, Union was developed behind closed doors for about 6 months when we worked on kind of the core prototype to figure out if our thesis on interoperability could actually be built and if it would have the performance characteristics we wanted. And we founded it with 6 engineers. So we really focused on the tech stack initially and had no BD or marketing plans in the early days, based on kind of one core thesis, which is that actually going for an app chain, or an app-specific rollup, makes a product fundamentally better. We see this with Hyperliquid, we see this with DYDX, but it does make the product journey for a chain harder because you lose coherence and composability with the wider ecosystem, right? Your user acquisition becomes more difficult. And so what we saw happening and what we feared was going to happen was that really big players would be able to make the move to their own stack and get bridge support from day one. And so build a moat with having a better product and like a more tailored experience, while maybe the small builders or the new projects would have to deploy on Ethereum or Solana and not be able to really compete with the big players. And for us, like that moat right now is being created by interop being fundamentally permissioned. You need to get support from XLR or layer 0, and you only get that if you have enough traction, if you're large enough, because these kind of legacy bridge providers, they cannot scale to thousands of networks. So they have to be relatively picky in what they support. So if you're a Berachain or a Monad, of course, you get bridge support from day one. But really what we looked to was build a network that would kind of support the next 10,000 startups, right? And really can unlock the interchain promise.
Yeah, that's. I think that's a very, very good way to get into this episode. But also, there's like the communication standard IBC, which is also fully permissionless. So maybe you can talk a little bit about why we basically need like another solution in addition to that, because IBC is standard that a project could enable, but you also, if I'm like, correct me if I'm wrong, but you also worked at Picasso Network, and Picasso Network brought, for example, IBC to Polkadot. So can you talk a little bit about the limitations of IBC and why we basically need like another layer in addition to that?
Yeah, exactly. So IBC A has a few core assumptions. For example, most things being tenement. So we encountered this when we brought it to Polkadot, needing to do a lot of hard engineering. But really, the more fundamental problem is in the original kind of interchain vision with having a dense network, of having everything connected to everything through IBC. You start spending a lot of your block space on IBC itself, on handling these transactions and doing verifications, which works when you've got like a cluster of 100, 150 chains. But when you start increasing that size, and if you want everything connected to everything, you really run into issues where you start spending 50% of your block space on IBC verification. So really the key unlock that you need here is basically generating ZKPs, because now what you get is a constant cost associated with your verification. And that kind of unlocks really making this possible for 1,000 rollups plus chains or even more. So that's what we originally focused on with Union, bringing that to the table. On top of that, there's some real kind of engineering efforts that are nicely concentrated around having one hub, one project that mainly focuses on this. In the end, every single app chain or app specific rollup has a core functionality, and interop right now takes them quite a lot of time to do and need to invest in, which usually is not necessarily part of their core competency or what the core product should be focusing on, right? Like if you're building a perp DEX or a trading platform as a chain, you really don't want to be spending 3 to 6 months on getting connected to everything else out there. Ideally, that should just take you the first 3 hours of your journey, and then you can focus back on the product.
Yeah, that's a very lovely way to put it. Because yeah, actually, I also played around with like product, and just the questions of interoperability are very, very heavy, and making interoperability possible is like one of the strongest tasks in the industry. So if you want to do it like the complete right way, you will encounter a lot of heavy lifting in terms of developing. So to understand, right, so basically you have the Union network, which basically provides like this package for every app chain or every application that, for example, is built on Chain, to say, okay, don't worry, bro, interoperability to every corner just works. Focus now on distribution.
Yeah, so basically the offering is kind of twofold. So on existing L1s or big rollups, you can see our partnership announcements, we deploy a set of gateway contracts so that app developers can just use those immediately. What I'm myself really excited about as well is that if you're developing your own app chain or your own rollup, you can actually integrate yourself with Union. So you don't need to DM us on Telegram. You don't need to do a Gov proposal with us. Ben, one of our engineers, did a demo at Modular Summit on literally building your own rollup and being connected to a Union testnet within an hour and being able to receive and obtain funds. So it's much closer to kind of that cloud experience that we want to have, where rollups and app chains become like microservices, and you can be set up and be connected like on the first day of building. When you basically use the Ignite scaffold to get your chain up and running, you can have your test network be connected to Union and connected to Spolia, to Ethereum, etc., and actually receive funds without ever needing to do the whole social process.
Yeah, that's like a huge game changer, because yeah, crypto, even though people might think about it in the first place, there's a lot about going to conferences, in real life meetings, in order to get the conversation started. So basically to have like this open source software in a way that you can just use if you want to see a lot of value. But yeah, talking maybe about like some constraints or like potential considerations that people need to think about is, what about like, for example, liquidity constraints? Like, would there be like a scenario where an application is not so relevant in that sense, but desperately needs liquidity, but would run into this issue because it can't get enough liquidity from the Union network? Or how would this be done in order to make sure that an application would need the sufficient liquidity? Or is it more kind of an order and demand thing? So if I'm on my application, I'm a user, I require liquidity, I buy it and I get it from Union. So how is this done?
Yeah, so Union kind of has two modes of operation. One is like we support the IBC protocol in full. And in the IBC protocol itself, you don't need to worry about liquidity because it's basically mint and lock and burn that's going on. So for a lot of the new assets and the new chains that we support, Union kind of issues the IBC assets, so you have unlimited liquidity. Some alpha on this. The next thing that we're working on is doing intent-based purging on top of Union. There, Union is used as a message passing layer for paying back liquidity providers. But in the end, orders are settled with an LP that's available on the chain. The upside of this is this allows for extremely fast transfers for end users and allows LPs to be paid back extremely fast as well. So that's in prototyping right now. In that case, you have more liquidity constraints. So that more depends on what's available on a specific chain, and is more akin to a cross model where you really have solvers and intent-based bridging. For new projects being built, usually it's kind of like you said, if you attract users, if you attract demand for liquidity going into your chain, then that can just arrive over Union.
Okay, so essentially the power is also in the application's distribution. So if I succeed with my application, if I attract enough users, then the liquidity eventually will come automatically. Is this how to put it?
Yeah, and of course, it can come extremely fast, right? So in that sense, like you basically connect to Union. If your app goes viral, then a minute later you could have hundreds of millions in liquidity. There's no real constraint on this in the system. There's no rebalancing that needs to occur, and overall, like the transfers are extremely fast as well. So you don't have a 24-hour wait window like some canonical bridges or slow exits.
Yeah, crazy that we had these bridges around 2 years ago, and they were the most relevant thing ever. But yeah, like the game completely changed here. So maybe let's talk about this, because in 2021, for example, we had these classical canonical bridges. A connection between chain A and B. You lock up your assets on chain A, you mint something on chain B, and you have a representation that lives on chain A, but now can be used on chain B. So and I think this is like very interesting. Back then, there were a lot of obstacles for building such a bridge, because it wasn't too easy to connect an EVM chain with a non-EVM chain. So, for example, connecting Ethereum with Solana was like a huge heavy lifting. So, can you like talk a little bit about the standardized procedure that you have with Union? So, if I, for example, use Union on Bearer chain and I bring EVM assets and non-EVM assets, what kind of asset do I have at the end of the day on Bearer chain? Is it like an ERC20 token of Solana, or would it be something else if I would use Solana on Osmosis? So maybe you can talk a little bit about that.
Yeah, no, like this is actually, I wouldn't say the hardest lifts, but it's on the architecture/design space, something that you have to make a lot of decisions on. There's a fundamental difference between a native Cosmos asset, an ERC20 asset, and whatever other asset you might find. And we try to make the mappings as one-to-one as possible. So in the Explorer, they show up with the same symbol, same amount of decimals. Union takes care of basically synchronizing this between different chains to get that experience. For assets, that's relatively simple. For NFTs, that's a little bit harder. But I think even more important for NFTs that you get the same experience, that they are like truly native and you do see the images pop up, the same traits, etc. On kind of our way where we approach this, this kind of a layer on top of IBC that we built. So Union itself comes with some extensions to IBC to really make this work as a first-class product. And this is kind of where I alluded to that IBC has some assumptions in the current core implementation that you're always communicating with Cosmos SDK-based chains and Tendermint. So we had to build all of this architecture out ourselves.
Yeah, like connecting like IBC chains, like Cosmos SDK chains, is relatively easy, but basically just to make it very, very clear to people now. IBC works, IBC is perfect, but it would be like very tricky to get IBC natively to Solana, to Ethereum, to Near and whatever. And you build a layer essentially on top of IBC to basically make the last outstanding chains that are non-IBC enabled yet IBC enabled, correct? Is that
exactly? Yeah, because for example, Ethereum does not really enshrine protocols in the core stack. It tries to push everything to the smart contract layer. So that's a layer we have to operate on as well. That's one of the reasons we use zero knowledge proofs, because if you do IBC naively on Ethereum, then you're going to be wasting too much gas and users would be paying way too much. So the verification backend we use is basically off-chain, and we only verify ZKPs on-chain. And then on top of that, we add some extensions. So IBC does not yet support batch transfers, but we do. So for the end user, it seems like a single transfer that's occurring. Under the hood, we're batching transfers within packets. And that way you get much better gas costs overall, because you kind of normalize the cost over the number of users you have.
So the ZK cryptology part essentially plays a very important part in regards to making things cheaper, correct?
Yeah, exactly. Like the first reason you use this is because basically it makes the on-chain cost go from about $1 million, $1.5 million gas to 200 to 400K. So that's a massive gas saving that you have. This verification can verify an arbitrary number of transfers. It can be up to thousands of transfers can be verified by one ZKP. So if you were just verifying a single transfer with it, that would be relatively expensive. You'd be paying as much as 3 XLR transfers approximately. But once you start doing 4 or 5 transfers within a single ZKP, it becomes cheaper, and you can go all the way up to hundreds. So that's one of the core kind of unlocks that we had. The next one is figuring out how to do this quickly. So a lot of people are, of course, experimenting with generating ZKPs and using those for different applications. But in the end, you want this to occur extremely fast, because when you generate a ZKP off-chain, you're on a server, it's generating a proof, and it can take minutes, even 10 minutes. I think with Tendermint X, you observe about 8-minute proof generation time, and that influences your bridge latency. That means that your bridge latency at least is going to be 8 minutes, if not more. With Union, we very much focused on like optimizing the bridge hub and the circuits that we have. So we have about 6 to 7 seconds for generating a proof, which means that your total bridge latency is about 20 to 25 seconds. Like there's some network latency, block times of different chains, how long a transaction stays in the mempool. But fundamentally, let's say that you had chains with 1 second block time. That means that Union can facilitate a bridge transfer in about 8 seconds between the two chains. And that's obviously like extremely fast. That's so close to almost being instant. And we have some improvements scheduled for this as well. So we're working with different parties to enable GPU acceleration for our prover. And with that, we might see like 2 to 3 second proving times. So we're getting really close to being able to actually do an IBC transfer like within a single block, right? And that will get us this interchain feel of everything being one single chain, even though it's like thousands of chains interconnected.
Yeah, differs a lot to what we have seen in 2021. I remember when I bridged FMOS for the first time, and it was like 2 or 3 hours. So yeah, we are getting really, really far away from that. I also believe we are getting closer to the topic that is like a core pillar of Union, which is horizontal scalability. So I think we are getting much, much closer to this topic now. So can you basically break it down into like a few simple sentences? So horizontal scalability, is it really this bridge as many assets as you want across multiple chains? Don't worry about the time that passes. It's much faster than what we have seen with canonical bridges, and due to ZK cryptology, it's also much, much cheaper. Like, how would you respond to this conclusion?
Yeah, correct. So our vision for crypto is many different chains, all interconnected with each other. And kind of this, like, if you're from like Web2 tech, you understand cloud infrastructure and many microservices all interconnected with each other. Like I said at the start of the podcast, this like allows builders to build a much better product. But what we saw previously, like in 2021, is because the interop was so extremely slow and expensive, that people had to rebuild entire ecosystems. What you actually saw happening was different like monolithic chains, each with their own DEX, lending market, VM, etc., having to try to spawn an entire new ecosystem themselves, and then like get a bunch of users to almost permanently migrate over. The vision we have is one where all of these different chains are their own products, but do rely on each other. So instead of a chain needing to like have its own DEX because it has a lending market and needing to build out ultimate liquidity, it can actually depend on another app chain or rollup for DEX services, for example. And if you get that like connection to be 1 second, then really like we're living in an asynchronous composable world where to the outside it kind of seems like one big chain. Because if you like right now as a user interact with Ethereum, your latency to seeing feedback is already 12 seconds. That's all it takes to get into the next block. That's when you know when something happens. So if you can get 2 app chains to communicate with each other within a second, then actually you can still do more interactions than you do in a single Ethereum block.
Yeah, totally agree on that. And I mean, it sounds super fascinating, but maybe let's talk about like a topic that's also like relevant in this discussion. And I'm talking to a lot of people about that because the question is also how many chains do we need at the end of the day, actually? So a lot of people always talk about having like 1,000 of different chains. I had a very similar conversation with Particle Network about that very recently. So in your opinion, how many chains do we need? Because at the end of the day, also having a blockchain is much more expensive than having a DApp on top of a blockchain. So how do you see the space evolving over the next couple of years? Like, will we have more app chains than actually DApps? Because I also believe there are a lot of app chains that could be also simple DApps. Same thing with rollups. So what are your thoughts on this?
So I think most chains are going to become sovereign rollups, which I almost consider the same, because you don't need a validator set of 100 or 150 if you can generate ZKPs for the validity of your chain, right? So I think we're going to see a migration where it's still the Cosmos SDK stack, but then a different type of consensus under the hood. That gives builders the same flexibility for building whatever they want, but just reduces the cost dramatically for actually what you're doing, and doesn't mean that you need to bootstrap the validator set. So I think most validators will migrate to validating unions, less and kind of these like bigger ecosystem that really are core infrastructure for settlement, interop, that empower all of these, you could call them apps, that are their own state machines that leverage these big networks for settlement and interop. How many do we need? To be honest, like we are very tired of the number of chains because currently the interop experience, the chain abstraction experience, the wallet experience is quite poor. But realistically, like look at how many different software as a service solutions are out there, how many fintech apps are out there, how many banks are out there. It's actually thousands to 10,000s to hundreds of thousands, right? Like that's really the target. We're going to in the future see much more chains focused on specific countries, specific user bases, right? Really with the tailored experience. But infrastructure needs to remove the fatigue that users have, right? Like this idea, like we have too many chains, really stems from just being annoyed by having too much noise come at you. And if you manage to take away that noise, take away the wait time, then it doesn't become an issue. Don't think anyone ever complains like we have too many smart contracts on Solana or on Ethereum, right? That's never a complaint because there the coherence and composability is quite good.
Yeah, I think the problem with too many chains was like some PSD from all of the chains that had a huge inflation in the beginning, and you had to pay huge costs just to keep the chain running. And yeah, then you have seen chains that raised a lot, people got excited about, and then the chain just needed to dump the price, or like the validators better said. Chain is looking at this in a different way, but this is another topic. But yeah, so your vision basically for the crypto industry is like that we see like more application specific roll-ups that have like a chain style architecture integrated, for instance, with Union, and you don't deal with different networks, and in that sense everything just flows.
Exactly. Yeah, I think that's the future everyone wants, and that's like giving people, like giving the users what they want, which is that simple UX experience. You always have to think like you have to give builders the tools to build novel products. If we all like decide, you know what, users are fatigued by different tech stacks, we're all going to move to Ethereum, then the next complaint is going to be all of the apps are the same and none have any uniqueness to it or a specific advantage, because that's because you can't do that much if you're all competing within like the same smart contract stack. It's really when you build your own state machines that you can get very unique. For example, what we see with what Skip protocol does with their Oracle solutions, their routing solutions, right? Like that, because you can actually embed core logic in your consensus, you can start doing really cool things.
Yeah, totally agree on that. And maybe, I mean, what became very clear for me is like the PMF of a union, especially when we look at some integrations and launches. We will talk about that in a second. But yeah, maybe to also make this clear from an economic perspective, what is like the value accrual of the union network? Can I imagine it like kind of as a settlement layer? So every transaction that kind of touches the union the union network also settles there in a way, or is it like more from an orchestration perspective, similar to how Agoric is looking at interoperability? So yeah, maybe you can dive deeper into like the economic meaning of the PMF that Union has.
Yeah, Union has a very foundational role here. So Agoric is actually integrating with Union to use it as an IBC provider. Union really is like, for those that are familiar with TradFi, DTCC, which is a protocol that banks, traders, basically every financial institution uses to do any type of financial commands across different sectors. So if you want to do a settlement, if you want to do a trade between different parties, this is how they broadcast it to each other. That is what Union is kind of poised to become. So that's kind of the core stack that we built out initially. So keeping our minds on kind of enabling order flow, enabling high throughput, a large number of connections. What we realized then after that is indeed like you can actually leverage Union as well as a settlement layer. And if you build a roll kit rollup or a roll chains rollup, you just open an IBC connection to Union, and effectively you're settling on all chains that Union is connecting to, and you have fast entry, fast exit to all of those chains as well. And an incredibly low fee, right? Because Union folds your proofs into its ZKPs. And so you technically settle on Ethereum without having to pay for this yourself at all. So in that sense, like it's a very powerful technological stack to use. Value accrual wise, so Union nets revenue for all of the computation that's providing. So relayers and solvers, they pay in the Union token for this to be able to verify the ZKPs, to send packets, etc. On the chains that we're connected to, we accept a lot of different assets as fee tokens. So it's not like you need Union tokens on Bearer chain to be able to use Union. You can pay in USDC, you can pay in ETH, in Honey, in BGT, etc. And the Union network requires this. We still have to model how this is distributed over the token holders. You kind of see different models here in the space where some protocols accrue this in a treasury. And so they have a very diversified treasury of different assets that they can use for further development or distribution, or they buy back their own token. You kind of see different models work well. We'll probably go with a DAO proposal to decide on which model Union actually goes with. And so let the community decide what might work best.
Yeah, very, very interesting. Also, the mechanism that basically token holders get exposure to all kinds of things that Union indirectly touches is pretty interesting. You talked a lot about Bearer chain. Maybe we could talk a little bit about the integration. So you also mentioned about the Agoric integration, but I think your integration with Bearer chain created the most buzz because Bearer chain as a Cosmos SDK chain would have found it like relatively easy to enable IBC, but now they moved away from that and said we will use just Union. So maybe you can talk a little bit about this integration and maybe some other integrations you are very excited about.
Yeah. So first of all, like they kind of migrated their architecture in V1 to V2 to being both the Cosmos SDK chain, which they use as their equivalent of the beacon chain. So if you're familiar with Ethereum architecture, Ethereum is two chains as well, and then having an execution chain as well. So there's no longer really like modules that can directly communicate on the execution side. So for them to use an IBC module from the Cosmos SDK became impossible. So here we really leverage like Union's stack to do IBC fully on their execution side. On the way back, however, Union needs to track both sides. So we kind of demodularize Berachain and combine those two individual chains once again into a single proof to be able to do IBC properly. Two other chains, like Cosmos chains that want to connect to Berachain, this still seems like a single IBC connection. So to them, they don't need to do too much engineering to make this work. I'm quite excited about it. We have a lot of plans for this. Like strong participation in their kind of DeFi scene with both Union token plus a bunch of assets that we want to ship over there. Other stuff that they're excited about is the potential for kind of Babylon assets and restake BTC to be sent over there too. So that's kind of our core focus right now. Hopefully, don't take my word for this, but we have the Berachain integration live on testnet today. We're doing the final touches right now with indexing all the data and making sure that goes fast enough and that it all works out of the box. And with that, we kind of have the first like modular hybrid chain fully connected and testable for everyone. If we make it in time, and otherwise, hopefully tomorrow.
Wow. Nah, that's an interesting word. But yeah, so yeah, just so you also bring like a lot of restake Bitcoin now to the Berachain ecosystem. So essentially kind of every relevant asset will be in the Berachain ecosystem from the very beginning. You are bringing Sol, ETH, BTC, all of the IBC assets. So is there like a certain order or something, or will it just seem a little bit like magic for non-technical people that that everything just gets released all at once, or is there like a release schedule for the different assets?
Yeah, so right now we're working quite closely with the Stride team on making sure that their assets will be available as soon as possible on Berachain's launch. Babylon and BTC L2s and kind of restake BTC are a bit like further ahead of the pipeline, but those networks have to launch yet as well. Overall, I think initially like a lot of the modular assets really need to find a proper home to do DeFi on, like a more extensive one. And I think especially like protocol-owned liquidity and how Berachain's model will make a really good home for these assets. And there's a nice overlap as well between kind of the validator sets of the ecosystems that we're connecting. So you're really reactivating the same participants that have incentive to make all of this work together very well. On assets that are of interest for people, like feel free to also tweet at us what you would like to see on different chains. What I'm fundamentally really excited about, what I feel like Cosmos has done and is doing quite well, is building like fundamental systems chains. Like kind of see a lot of eigenlayer AVSs, modular chains being built on the Cosmos SDK, and having a lot of staked value, potentially generating a lot of value through staking. But then so far, like being able to use them in DeFi hasn't always gone that well. So you kind of miss the second part of the user story of what you want to do with the token. And so being able to, for example, convert a lot of the Cosmos assets into different stable coins that have then different use cases in Berachain or even movement labs, that's something that really excites me. And that's what I think is going to revitalize a lot of the Cosmos assets.
Yeah, speaking of assets and maybe assets that people desire, what is actually about TON? Like it's the 9th largest cryptocurrency now. I've seen a tweet on of somebody like if somebody works on bringing TON to like a broader ecosystem, so it's actually TON in the pipeline as well. That would be an asset that interests me a lot because the Telegram blockchain has a lot of users.
Yeah, that one we've been looking into that. We've been talking with a few actually L2s building on top of TON, sovereign L2s, to do IBC connections and get connected to that ecosystem. To be honest, it flew by me as well a little bit. Obviously, like with the distribution it grew immensely fast, but the chain itself is actually extremely weird. It's definitely completely outside of what we've seen so far with Solana, Ethereum, etc. So it's a completely new stack that we kind of need to conquer.
Yeah, also it came completely out of nowhere. I met them at Cosmos 23 in Istanbul, and back then I was super confused. Oh, Telegram has a blockchain, and now they are the 9th largest one, which is pretty crazy to think of. In regards to developers using Union, what could devs do today already? For example, Berachain is about to launch. Can Berachain applications already play around with a Union demo or something?
Yeah. So when we announced the testnet activation of Parachain, the docs for the EVM stack will go live too. So you can call the contracts, you can interact with the core protocol. Union provides a lot of other tools as well. So we have various APIs to actually monitor the progress of different bridging transfers. So we do full indexing of all the chains that we're connected to. So you don't need to figure out yourself, did my transfer arrive correctly, or in what stage is it right now? Is it being refunded? Instead, we have all of those APIs available for developers to query and embed in their front ends. All the stuff that they can be building, and that we'd love to see people come. So we have the first few projects, can't tell the names yet, that are looking to build exclusively on the Union stack and build out new products. We're very interested in everyone that's interested in building yield-bearing vaults with the assets that are locked in Union. I think that's a key unlock, and we've heard a lot of new builders ask for basically a blasts model, being able to have a single bridge connection where the assets that are being stored are yield farming so that they can rebase on their chain. So anyone that's interested in kind of exploring this area of making sure that bridge AUM is used more effectively, that's something that my DMs are very much open to and we're looking to explore.
Yeah, you heard it here first. So we will provide some docs in the podcast links at least. On YouTube, it's not possible anymore to link to any crypto website anymore without risk. But we will link a couple of resources in the description. So maybe like to conclude everything here a little bit to make sure that people really fully understood Union. So you can imagine as Union, like the Union network, enhancing the functionalities of IBC, bringing it to much more ecosystems that would be either very hard or impossible to ship IBC to, for example, Solana and a lot of others. And because the Union network is in between and basically orchestrate and touches all of these interactions, there's like a value accrual and a PMF for like Union holders, because they would earn like these fees and the tokens that the Union network touches. And you envision kind of a future where more and more applications become app specific roll-ups, and that we will have more roll-ups than chains, and eventually like even roll-ups that operate in very, very specific sectors or even regions in the world. And Union is kind of this communication network similar to what we have seen in traditional finance before. Is this like kind of a perfect TLDR for people to take away from this conversation?
Yeah, and for developers like right now, or to be honest, for anyone, I feel actually the things we're most proud about is like Union has no centralized components. So there's no oracles, there's no multi-sig that can get hacked that then can be used to steal the bridge funds. And that actually took a lot of security engineering and cryptography to accomplish. And on top of that, Union is actually quite fast. Like if you're looking to see bridge latencies of about like 30 seconds, then really have a look at Union. And I think within the next 2 years, we're going to get that down to like sub 5 seconds. Right now, what dominates is the block times of the different chains that we connect to and the network latency. But overall, like if you're kind of looking to participate on perhaps the first intro provider that'll see like sub 1 second transfer times between chains, then definitely use Union.
Yeah, you heard it first. So all the links that are needed to reach out to get started with building on Union are in the description, as always, at least on the podcast. But with that being said, Karel, thank you so much for shedding a lot of light on Union. Very excited to see your launch, hopefully in the next couple of weeks / months. And also excited to see like this interesting synergy between you guys and Berachain. So a lot of things to look forward to.
Yeah, thank you so much for having me.